Mariners of Reddit, what's the strangest thing you've seen out on the open ocean? I was on a fishing boat heading for Ross Sea in Antarctica, and 2 times we got fully stopped, dead in the water and completely surrounded by ice. White as far as the eye could see, which is a lot on a clear day. Turns out it was a thin layer of superficial ice that forms sometimes, and after a few tries, and a couple hours, we moved on, but it was pretty scary at the time. Moving forward through the ice was quite weird too. Another fun one was the largest school of dolphins I've seen, in the Pacific out the coast of Peru. Easily in the hundreds. A swarm of large squid, large as in about a meter tops, nowhere near a kraken, at night. That was off the Peruvian coast too. A trio of sea lions swimming alongside the boat, a small one off the Uruguayan coast, breaching in sync over and over like dolphins. And a whale, probably a mink, breaching not 2 meters from the board. Man, I miss fishing boats. I have so many fond memories. One time on the coast I saw a massive storm stretching as far as you could see, which is of course very far when you have nothing obstructing your view. There was lightning everywhere. I can't put it into words, every city was probably getting a lightning strike per minute, but from my point of view with this massive panoramic view, there must have been 10 bolts of lightning per second, sustained over at least an hour, absolutely mesmerizing. Like any good mariner, I grabbed my cigarettes, and did the old 1 foot on the railing and watched. I live in Michigan and we have the Great Lakes. These lakes contain huge shipwrecks and fish so big that people can't believe they aren't from the ocean. Lake Michigan freezes in the winter near the beach to where people can climb the ice, but it freezes in weird ways. It looks like giant frozen waves and small ice caves. Sometimes ice spheres form as the winter starts and thousands of ice balls just wash up on the beach. There are countless real horror stories and just as many ghost stories about the lakes. The strangest thing I've personally seen, I believe, is that giant ice wave effect and people swimming in freezing temperatures. I've seen massive ships visit from the ocean that make you sit there in awe at how deep these lakes must be for those to function here. Many people die and go missing in Lake Michigan every year. There are unpredictable currents that can pull people under, and most people here are taught how to best deal with these situations, but it still can pull you out into extremely deep waters where it is likely you cannot get enough energy to make it back to shore. Was motoring through Hurricane Irene, captaining a 32 charter catamaran, between Anegada and Jost Van Dyke in open water many miles from any coast/harbor, and stumbled upon a local man with no boat doing deep-sea spear fishing. Dude had a 4x 1.5 foot Rubbermaid container attached to 2 buoys filled to the brim with ice and fish. Probably at least 300 pounds of deep-sea catches, before gutting. And all he had was a rudimentary, blacksmithed, iron spear rigged with silicone tubing on a stick for the propulsion. Why the F are you spear fishing in the open ocean during a hurricane, and how the F did you spear all those, you wizard? We scooped him up, gave him a ride, and then enjoyed an enormous bounty of fresh deep-sea fish with the fellow. He must have given us 20 to 25 pounds of his catch when we scooped him and gave him a ride to Jost Van Dyke. Saw the dude later on, getting off his dingy at Pusser's bar with plenty of fresh catches for the tourists. Dude was chill, poured us some of his homebrew rum and open fire grilled us some local chicken. Was bomb AF. Never learned his name. My family traveled transatlantic in 1957 on a steamship, the SS Constitution, when I was 7. The ship sailed fairly close to the Capelinhas, which was a submarine, underwater, volcano that erupted from the fall of 1957 to the spring of 1958. It is in the Azores off the coast of Portugal or thereabouts. The ship's captain came as close as he dared and we all came out on the deck to watch. From where we were it looked like the volcano was floating on the ocean's surface. They told me that the volcano was creating an island, and as crazy as that sounds, it turns out to be true. On September 27, beginning at about 6:45 in the morning, a submarine eruption, 300 m from Ponta dos Capelinhos, 100 m from the Ilhas dos Capelinhos, began. Whale spotters at Costado de Nau, a few meters above the Capelinhos lighthouse, saw the ocean churning to the west and alerted the lighthouse keepers. On October 5, the clouds of clay likely rose about 1 kilometer in height and solid fragments, reaching an area of 1,200 meters around. The buildings in the area began to experience the first damages, windows were broken, tiles fell from the roofs. By the next day, the first ashfall began on land. In a few hours a black mat covered the extreme west of island, reaching 2.5 kilometers from the crater, necessitating the evacuation of the settlements of Norte Pequeno and Canto. Initially, gases and pyroclastic explosions persisted until October 13, while gradually diminishing, but were rapidly replaced by violent explosions, lava bombs, ash, and lava streaming into the sea. This intense eruption occurred until the end of October with constant ash raining on File, destroying cultural lands, inhibiting normal farming and forcing the residents from local villages to evacuate. By October 10, the eruption had initially formed a small island, baptized Ilha Nova, English, the new island, Ilha dos Capelinhos, English, Island of Capelinhos, or Ilha do Espírito Santo, English, Island of the Holy Spirit, by the locals, 600-meter diameter and 30-meter height with an open crater to the sea. By October 29, the island grew to 99 meters high and 800 meters in diameter of coarse black ash. We crossed that ocean 3 times in the 1950s, but that was the most interesting thing we saw. Well, that, and the man in a boat that had been damaged by the storm we'd just gone through. His mast was broken and he was adrift. It took hours and hours for the captain to maneuver the ship close enough that we could board the man safely. He came aboard, very thin and wrapped in a blanket. Lucky to be alive and for us to have such a good captain. I was relieving the mid-watch one night. Had to be 0% illumination. I couldn't even see my own hands. There were no contacts either, except for what the off-going watch described as a glow on the horizon, dead ahead. Radar and ACE showed nothing along the ship's track, so I assumed it must be some astronomical or meteorological effect. As the watch progressed, the glow on the horizon would not go away. I double-checked the charts to make sure I wasn't driving right at some land mass, but we were still definitely in open ocean. Still nothing on radar and ACE. And to make matters worse, the glow was growing brighter and wider, now straddling our track by about 10 nanometers on either side. Then, ACE started lighting up. First it was one contact emerging about 15 nanometers off the bow. Then it was 2. Then 4. Finally, the glow on the horizon turned into many distinct lights. Soon, stretching all across the horizon, was an innumerable number of incredibly bright lights. The lights belonged to tiny fishing vessels that use lamps with the power of a small sun to attract squid to their position. The sheer number of fishing boats and their many suns illuminated the bridge to a point where I could see the stunned faces of everyone else on the bridge. It was insane to me how this fleet of rinky-dink fishing boats managed to get out to the middle of the ocean and how they were a way to light up the night like a rock concert. They had to be visible from over 30 nanometers out. Anyways, the fishing boats turned into more of a nuisance than anything else, as they were a pain to maneuver around. Worse, some asshole fishermen kept shooting laser pointers at our pilot house. A waterspout. or an uncharted sandbar in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. Other than that, derelict vessels are a little eerie, and pirate boats/smugglers are just kind of meh. Edit, I just remembered, one time off the coast of FL one night I was driving parallel to the coast headed south about 50 miles out to sea. I looked right and saw the shoreline clear as a bell. Almost simultaneously someone topside got a text message. You can only see about 15 miles to the horizon from my pilot house, and cell reception is about the same. So needless to say I got that sinking feeling that there was some egregious error with the GPS and that we were standing into danger. I freaked out and started trying everything I could, from checking radar to see if it was picking up land, it was, at 50 nanometers, to verifying fathometer readings against charted depth to dead reckoning the last 24 hours of course and speed changes. Turned out we were where the GPS thought we were, there was just some refractive fuckery going on. I also had visual and radar paint on some vessels in excess of 40 miles, which is also theoretically impossible. It doesn't sound that bad, but it was pretty frantic, driving through the ocean and suddenly unsure you're in safe water because the atmosphere is bending the light wrong. I've spent about a full year, in total, at sea. Never have seen anything strange as in something I couldn't explain. Probably the strangest experience was the one time, only once, ever, that I was on a fishing boat and the skipper just turned the engine off for the night. We just drifted, while two guys slept and one stayed on watch. The silence and the sound of the waves on the boat, it was peaceful, yet disconcerting. Edit, that boat also had a message, written in accumulated cigarette soot above a bunk, from a guy who had drowned a few years back. Just shit-talking one of his buddies, who happened to still work on that boat when I was on it. Nobody ever erased it? In Slovenia, whilst on our research vessel, we saw a pale and bold thing almost emerge from the sea. It looked incredibly humanoid, as in its head was poking above sea level, with a thin layer of water over its head. It was there for a split second, and we assumed it was a diver trying to scare us. Lo and behold, we carried out a biodiversity assessment in that very area and found nothing apart from some smaller fish. But no man. To this day, me and my marine biology professors have no idea what it was, and how it got there. I was majoring in marine biology at the time. We named this species as Baldus menius. I was on holiday and fishing with my GF in a little rowing boat that we had rented, with a motor, in a remote area on a fjord in Norway. We were about 400 m offshore when a fog started to develop around us. After a few minutes it was so thick we could only see a few meters around us, the water had become mirror flat, and it was so quiet I could almost hear my heart beating. We sat in the boat and talked about how strange it was and snapped a couple of selfies before firing up the motor to try to slowly navigate out of the fog. My GF was getting a bit scared at this point and so was I. Even though the boat engine was on and in gear, the boat wasn't moving. I tilted the engine slightly up and saw that the propeller indeed spinning, so I lowered it again and gave it some gas. We still weren't moving. GF dropped a piece of paper in the water and I gave it more gas. Nothing, we just weren't moving. The water was dead still, the fog almost seemed to pulse around us, and it was eerily silent. GF started to bawl and I was freaking out when suddenly it felt like a giant foot kicked at the back of the boat shoving us forward. The boat surged out of the fog back into the fjord, and the fog dissipated behind us in a matter of a few seconds. The propeller had taken hold and we headed back to the dock. Now this was odd, but not as odd as what awaited us when we got back to the hut we had rented. The owner of the boat was waiting for us and said he was taking the boat back immediately because of some booking problem. He gave us back twice the money we had rented it for, and then said he had to leave, so we headed back to the boat together to get our stuff. As we were walking, my GF mentioned he said yes, we know about it. We pushed him further on the subject, but he got a bit angry and said just get your things. It was bizarre. Back at the hut we noticed the selfies we had taken were just white. There was zero EXIF data on them on both phones, and oddly, both of our phones were 100% charged. This in itself was odd, as it was mid-afternoon and my S7 usually had about 40% remaining because of battery degradation. Anyway, that's my weird experience. Wow. I might win this one. I was doing drug patrolling operations and some smugglers had tried to sink their boat when we showed up, but it had too many bales of cocaine to sink. We arrested the smugglers and then shot the boat, but the bullets would only penetrate a few feet into the bales. This thing wouldn't sink. A bunch of whales were curious about what was going on, so we stopped shooting at the boat because we didn't want to harm them at all. We rammed the boat at slow speed with our ship and it broke in half and sunk, except for the bales of cocaine, which have bullet holes in them, and now the whales are playing with them. And I had to go down in a boat and get the bales of cocaine away from the whales, who were now enjoying themselves a lot more than they were a couple hours ago. That was a long day. TLDR, whales on cocaine. 2 for me. 2008 in the Atlantic. A wall. Our deck was 60 feet off the water and the wall was easily 30 feet off the water. It came from nowhere. Not on a chart, not on anything. We saw it on radar and approached slowly to inspect. Not sure whatever came of as we went back to doing gator squares waiting to refuel. Easily 30 feet high and miles long. 2010 Atlantic, fog. Endless dog that laid down on the ship while in transit. It was so thick you would get soaking wet from it on the smoke deck. Couldn't see outside more than 5 feet. The blowers in the engine room sent it inside and we had to turn them off. I went to a mooring station to look out and it suddenly disappeared. We just drove out of it into a perfectly clear sky. Not a cloud all the way to the horizon. Bonus, the night sky. It's fucking incredible, unmolested by light pollution. You see exactly why humans wanted to find a way to map it, zoom in on it, discover it. It's mind-blowing to view. I mean, really puts you in your place in the universe. I was working on a small cruise ship that had been chartered by a group of about 600 members of Titanic Appreciation Group. Some were fans of the film, some were history buffs, etc. The voyage was to commemorate, not recreate, the 100th anniversary of the sinking of the Titanic. We sailed from New York City, stopped in Halifax, and then sailed a few days out to the site of the disaster. While on board, there were historical talks, group events, etc. And on the evening of the actual 100th anniversary, a lot of people dressed in period costumes, and they had hired a band with authentic musical instruments from that era to play, and finish, that last song. It was all pretty surreal, made more so by the relatively calm water and the moonlit sky, and by knowing that the actual Titanic was lying directly below us on the sea floor. The strange part was that during the night, they had a priest gather at the railing of the open deck to say a prayer and toss a wreath into the sea. At the moment he did this, a single ordinary bird, a sparrow or similar, came out of nowhere and landed on the deck by my feet. This was over 400 miles, 640 kilometers, from the nearest land, and we'd at sea for a few days. It was a bit startling, even though I'm logically convinced the bird had just been on board with us since our last port. The stranger part was that the bird didn't seem sick or injured, but also wasn't afraid of me and allowed me to pick it up. I had to keep it in my cabin and feed it for a few days until we got back to land. When we did, I took it up to the deck where I'd found it and released it back out to fly away. After spending several seasons commercially fishing Alaskan waters, every season brings new and strange things seen and heard. One time I was sitting on deck at sunset gazing out and I heard what must have been a massive splash behind me, and I turned around to find completely still water with no ripples for miles to be seen. None of the other 3 dudes on board heard a thing. Also, I was driving directly into the brightest sunrise I have ever seen for about 3 hours straight, and I swear my eyes were so shot I thought I saw a great old ship like a sloop or a caravel flaming on the horizon. It's little odd things that are just real enough to really make you a little spooked. This is something I was told from a guy who supposedly experienced this firsthand. It's still a sea story, so feel free to take it with a amount of salt. Supposedly, on the USS Stark, it was hit by an Iranian missile back in the 80s. That missile caught them with their radar down, and the first indication it was happening was the forward lookout calling it in. Missile drills the bosun's locker, killing everybody inside. This is as recounted to me in the story. Anybody who knows better can feel free to correct me. And supposedly, according to this guy, in the middle of the night, you can still hear them bullshitting, drinking coffee, that sort of thing. Not unhappy, not in pain, but like they never realized they're dead, and they're just having the morning bullshit session, forever. Edit: in freaky news, I didn't even realize that the USS Stark was hit on this day, May 17, in 1987. Does this add to the wee-woo?